Buling being announced as a 4-star character is in my opinion very important for the future of Wuthering Waves, and in this video I wanted to talk about why I believe 4-star characters to be such an important addition for the game, and what happens when they're not introduced. Starting of course with why 4 stars are important, and I think this one should be pretty obvious to most people. 4-star characters give more budget options to your team, which effectively reduces the amount of limited 5-star characters you need to pull for your teams. Especially for newer players, it often becomes an issue that they want to pull for a new character but they don't have any good team options. This actually applies to the current banner DPS being Galbrenna. Galbrenna, while working perfectly fine with Mortefi and Shorekeeper, it's not a very good team, and you're gonna very much notice the loss of the 5-star supports. Galbrenna is primarily played with Monofusion at the moment or Ifilova, and while she is getting a team with Choyuwen in this second half, by then Galbrenna will be gone. So Galbrenna is not a very efficient investment for someone who doesn't have the Monofusion core or Ifilova, so it can actually very much hurt a character when they do not have a good non-premium team. But this issue also extends beyond the new player experience, because very often what will happen with these characters is that, for example, you'll be interested in a character like Lupa and you'll want to use her. However, because you don't have a Brand or a Chongli and you don't even have Encore, you won't be able to find any use inside of this Lupa, which means that ultimately you're gonna have to skip a character you like because you're not able to make a good team for them. This is why 4-star characters are so important, especially good ones, because they allow you to invest into certain archetypes without requiring too many pulls. Currently, if you want to make a negative status team, you'll have to pull for both a main DPS and a sub DPS, Zani and Phoebe and Kardathi and Chikona, and I primarily want to focus on the Zani and Phoebe combination, because this is the one that most people can agree is pretty egregious. Zani's damage counts as Spectrofrazzle, which, guess what? Phoebe massively buffs Spectrofrazzle, more than doubling its damage in fact due to her having 100% amplification, as well as having Spectro Res Shred, and if you have her signature weapon, that's just even more buffing. Which means that ultimately, when you have Phoebe, your Zani is getting a ton of buffs that she wouldn't be getting if you don't have Phoebe. However, in order to balance the sheer amount of buffing that Phoebe does, they made Zani's damage a lot lower when you don't have Phoebe. This became a massive problem for the Zani fanbase. A lot of them chose to skip Phoebe, specifically so they could have more time to save for Zani, and that ultimately ended up hurting them a lot, because as we now know, Zani without Phoebe is a massive damage loss, and while it's technically still playable and is capable of clearing endgame content, it requires you to put in a lot more efforts to actually get those clears. So ultimately, pulling Zani without a Phoebe is heavily discouraged, and people realize this. Zani's sales were in fact damaged because she ended up relying on Phoebe way too hard. When you ask anyone the question, why does Kuro not make 4-star characters, the answer will almost always be the same, so they can force you to pull the 5-star. However, the alternative option to this is simply not pulling the Zani either. You can just choose to skip Zani because she's not a good investment for you. So all the money Kuro would gain by selling more Phoebes is eventually also lost by people who choose to not get Zani. So the Kuro doesn't make 4 stars because they lose the money argument ultimately ends up falling flat. An excellent example of this ended up being Augusta. As we all know, Augusta has a premium team with herself, Yuno, and Shorekeeper. This is the intended team that Kuro Games wants you to play. However, there's a lot of people that ended up not pulling for Yuno. Why? Because Augusta works perfectly fine with Mortefi, and that was one of her primary selling points as a character. Augusta is very powerful, even when you don't have Yuno, but Yuno is still a major enough damage increase for those who care about getting the full combo. A ton of people who pulled for Augusta did so specifically because she was a good investment for their account. I know plenty of people who simply would not have gotten Augusta if you needed to have Yuno for her to be good. A lot of people were simply finished when it came to investing into their other teams, or came back from long breaks. When you've come back for a long break and you need to start off with an entirely new team, you're not gonna pull for the DPS that is chained to their support. You're gonna pull for someone who's gonna be completely fine with characters you already have on your account. And with Mortefi being a 4-star character, Augusta was an excellent example of this. She was just a very good investment for a ton of people, because no matter what happened with she was always going to have a good 4-star option, and that's what was relevant. While a ton of these people also ended up trying to pull the important part is that quite a lot of them also failed in getting They tried to pull her and lost to 50-50, or they just simply didn't have the pulls to get her. And that's completely fine. That's the good part of Augusta's kit. You're able to grab an Augusta, and even if you want to end up pulling for a premium team, you don't have to feel pressured about if you're gonna get or not. Those who got ended up being very happy with the combination, but the same goes for those who ended up failing to get her, as well as those who chose to skip her entirely. Augusta being so incredibly accessible did a lot for her sales and a lot for the community's opinion on her, so making good 4-star characters will eventually increase the sales of your 5-stars as well, because people will be a lot more confident to pull for them instead of being hesitant into making an investment they can't afford. So now that we've discussed why 4-star characters are important, I think it's time to really talk about which 4-star characters we need to fill up which holes, because there are quite a bit. The obvious ones I want to mention right away are a 4-star character for every negative status. This may take a while, but I believe it's very important to have a 4-star character that deals in every single negative status and is also capable of doing at least a little bit of buffing. For example, we need a Spectro 4-star who's capable of applying Spectro Frazzle and at least has some kind of buffing in their kit. This would at least make Zani a little bit more bearable. So over time, I would really like it if we also got a 4-star for Error Erosion application, a 4-star for Havoc Bane application, Glacio Shave, Fusion Burst, etc, etc. I think we need a good 4-star for every single negative status. Then next up, it's time to talk about buffing. And I think it's important to have a 4-star character for every single damage type, as well as for every single attribute. When it comes to attributes, we have a Havoc buffer in Donjin and an Arrow buffer in Alto. When it comes to damage types, we have a basic buffer in Thundah and a heavy buffer in Mortefi. We also have a bunch of skill buffers through Taucha and Lumi, but they aren't really that good. So I do think that making upgrades for those two characters is also important. That leaves us with Glacio, Spectro, Fusion, and Electro, and then when it comes to damage types, we are left with Liberation and Echo damage primarily, but I would also like to see an upgrade for a potential skill damage buffer. Now, when it comes to making these characters, I do think it's important to make them actually good. Lumi and Taucha are capable of buffing resonant skills with their Ultra skill. However, their rotation is so long that for a lot of characters, it ends up simply not being worth it. Yuenwu is preferred over Taucha for a Jinshi team, specifically because Taucha has way too long of a rotation, while not having enough additional utility to actually make her worth using. So when we are making these sub-DPS characters, they need to at least have a semi-decent rotation time of around 7 seconds. I would also find it preferable if they have a similar S6 to characters like Donjin, where they're able to buff some attack, as well as doing at least some personal damage, between the 150,000 and 200,000 damage range. Because it doesn't matter what kind of buff you put on Ultra skill, if it takes you too long to actually use that Ultra skill, and you don't give me anything worthwhile in return, you're gonna end up becoming another victim to Sanhua. I also believe that we deserve more healers, because we currently only have Baizha and Yohu. Baizha is actually pretty decent, and I think she's fine for what she's meant to do. But Yohu just isn't. She has too long of a rotation time, and her buff is too niche to actually be utilized. I would like to see at least 2 more good healer 4-stars around the level of Baizha, maybe a little bit better, because that way, people can still use Verena and then 3 4-star healers. This way, people would be far less pressured into pulling Shorekeeper, or pulling characters like Kardathir or Flova who don't use Shorekeeper. But that's just my opinion on 4-stars. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, join my Discord, which is linked in the description. And if you just want to see more of me, check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I don't post much, but when I do, I just kind of post what I feel like. But that'll be all from me. Peace.